It's Jordan Chariton with Status Coup. Delighted to be joined by Marianne Williamson, 2020 presidential challenger and best-selling author and all-around inspirational speaker. And frankly, in 2020, in my view, was really, really, unfortunately and unfairly mocked by the media, not taken seriously, but really, in my view, brought a lot to the table in terms of the discussion among too many candidates. So, I wanted to, before we get into politics, I just wanted to ask, kind of from a psychological level, I've traveled so much, and something I'm seeing more and more, it's not just that we're so polarized. It's also that I think there's so many people, whether it's on the left, right, whatever, that are without leaders and kind of hopeless, for lack of a better word. And it's really creating this vacuum for them to fall into some dark spaces, whether it be conspiratorial, blaming the other. I wanted to ask you, because you've talked a lot about that, and just when people don't have hope, it fosters the conditions for people to go into more dark thinking and rabbit holes.
If you only look at our situation from a material perspective, people have every reason to be depressed. Because if you only look at things in terms of the externalities, it is as bad as people fear. The system is all locked up. But the problem with our politics is that it's only seen things through the filter of externalities. So if you think that that's all there is, then people being disillusioned is not a bad thing. It just means you were under an illusion before that you ever thought it was as simple as that. So on one hand, the fact that people are recognizing what's bad is not of itself a bad thing. Sometimes depression, anxiety, being really sad about something is not dysfunctional. Sometimes it's functional. If you have a broken leg, if you have a broken arm, the brain registers pain, and the brain registers pain for a reason. It's a functional response of the body, because the brain is telling you, you need to address this and you need to reset the bone. When conditions are really bad in your life and you feel an upset about it, it's your psyche telling you, you need to address this. We need to we need to change our thinking. We need to reset our thinking, just like you reset a bone, and we need to reset our social and economic system. Now, if you think that we have to look to the same people who created this mess to fix it, then of course you feel upset. And the people's rage and upset is legitimate. What's illegitimate from a larger perspective is to think that that's all you have. We're not the first generation to be faced with conditions that were seemingly intractable. There was no reason on a rational level to believe that the abolitionists would prevail. All the economic system of the South was against them. Huge economic and political forces were against them. There was no reason for the women's suffragettes to think that the suffrage movement would prevail. Huge economic and political and misogynistic systems were against them. There was no reason rationally for the civil rights movement to believe that they could prevail, but they worked anyway, and ultimately they succeeded. And so much of our public conversation today peripheralizes the tools and the mindset that is most needed at this time in order to prevail, and which former generations knew. The abolitionist movement emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. It was a moral stance. Many of the women who were the leaders of the women's suffragette movement were Quakers. They were taking a religious stance because the whole belief in women's equality emerged from their religious conviction that there is a light within all of us through which we are all equal. And the same with the civil rights movement. It was led by a Baptist preacher named Martin Luther King, who did not start as a movement leader. He started as a religious leader who talked about politics. Then he moved into his political leadership, but he based his philosophy on a religious stance. Martin Luther King said, the desegregation of the American South is the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement, but the ultimate goal is the establishment of the beloved community. So in the abolitionist movement and in the women's suffragette movement and in the civil rights movement, it emerged from those who realized that there is possibility beyond the world that is all sewn up. And it is that ground on which they stood. And that's why I've always felt, and I understand the right-wing partnership with evangelical Christianity, et cetera, but those forces are not what I consider the deep religious and spiritual forces, because the deep religious and spiritual forces I'm talking about have nothing to do with institutional religion, have nothing to do with dogma or doctrine. It has to do with human consciousness and the quality of personhood that you see present in the early days of the abolitionist movement, in the early days of the women's suffrage movement, in the early days of the civil rights movement, by those who were taking a stand not just in terms of their circumstances, they were taking a stand in terms of the ages. And they knew, they didn't just believe, they knew from experience, they knew from looking at history, they knew based on their own deep conviction that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The real Christian says, yeah, the crucifixion is real, but the resurrection follows. Someone who is deeply into the Old Testament says, yes, the slavery in Egypt was real, but it led to the promised land. This is why Martin Luther King spoke in terms of the promised land. When he spoke about the desegregation of the American South, he used the image, the promised land, that archetype. So I believe that this is a time where if you only look at the world and you only look at American politics from a traditional lens, then you have every reason to be upset and every reason to be depressed and every reason to be angry because, you know, it is as bad as they say. The point is, however, so it was with abolition as well. It was with women's suffrage as well. It was with civil rights as well. But the wall, you know, it burst, the waters parted, as it were. And that is because of a quality of personhood. People are right to think that traditional activism alone will not get us out of this mess. It will take a quality, you know, the era of data collection is over. We know what happened here. We know what's happening now. And now I think it's time for courage. It's time for inspiration. It's time for all of us working together on whole new levels. I know you know what I mean. Look at you and me, Jordan. We've known about each other. You see this a lot right now. People have known about each other, but now it's almost like everybody's huddling together, and you can feel the creation of a new beginning and a new resonance and a new field of possibility that was not there while we were still under the illusion that maybe we could still fix it with the master's tools. And you know, it's that line, you will not tear down the master's house using the master's tools. Another line that is very relevant here is that you can't put new wine in old bottles. So we're creating new bottles here. We're creating new wine. About that, we can be very excited. This is the end of one phase of our political understanding, but it's the beginning of a new one.
You know, covering the campaign, Biden didn't really run on many actual policies. It was kind of restore the soul of the nation. And I always I knew that was a bit hollow because I've traveled a lot and I've seen that the soul of the nation is a new Gilded Age. I mean, that's the soul of the nation. And I think a lot of people voted for him, not because they were inspired by him, but because they just wanted Trump out. But now with Biden a year in, they're seeing that soul of the nation is still a $7.25 minimum wage. That soul of the nation is just an insanely chaotic pandemic where basic things that would be simple for a government that doesn't think about the economy first, thinks about public health first. You know, that soul of the nation, you have people being demanded to come back to work while sick with COVID. I mean, I could go on and on. Can you kind of talk about, I think a lot of people that voted for Biden, not for him, but to remove Trump, that awakening they're having now, I think you phrased it, they thought the awakening was Trump, but the awakening was really Biden.
Yeah, I heard Peter Hager say that. I thought it was brilliant. So this is the deal. The $7.25 an hour minimum wage is not the soul of this nation. It is a perversion of the soul of this nation. Gilded Ages, and I agree with you, we're in the second Gilded Age here, is an aberration. It is not the march of the soul of the nation. It is a dark chapter in American history. The fact that so many tens of millions of Americans live on survival, basically, and with chronic economic, social, and even biological trauma at this point in the richest country in the world is not the soul of this nation. It is what has happened when something that is soulless has so gotten hold of our economic system and our political system. And that's why it was so cynical for someone who will not stand up for the PRO Act, someone who will not cancel the college loan debt, someone who will not expand Medicare, someone who will not take a stand for environmental protection and climate mitigation the way we need to. How dare he talk about healing the soul of America? It is very cynical, and people have the right to be very resentful of that. I am as well. I'm not feeling that emotionally, but I get it. There's nothing really wrong about that. You don't use a term like soul of a nation as a PR stunt, and that's clearly what happened here.
And also, I'm seeing, because I first started paying attention to politics really in 2004, Bush, Kerry, and I'm just kind of seeing this same old record, only they're dusting it off. And that is Democrats I'm talking about. We're going to sprinkle some crumbs economically. We're going to take those crumbs and kind of market it as transformational. The infrastructure deal is the most recent example. But really, we're going to run on saving democracy. 2004 was the most important election of our lifetime. 2008, most important election of our lifetime. Each cycle, that's what you hear. And now we're seeing, not that the filibuster is not important. I don't want to minimize that it is. Voting rights, very, very important priority. But they're shifting to voting rights and non-economic things, because essentially, in my view, Biden didn't fight for any of those economic things because the donors will only allow them to go so far. I wanted to ask you, basically from the start, Biden, even with the media, these new FDR articles, the Democrats and him chose to preemptively surrender on most bold things, even though they had a mandate for those things, very popular policies throughout the Build Back Better Act. What does this do? I'm not talking about the midterms, but when a party just chooses not to actually be in opposition to the Republicans, doesn't this just foster the conditions for further, empowering of the right wing?
Yes. And it has been true for a long time. You can go back to Barack Obama. Barack Obama in 2008 was given a mandate for transformational progressive change. And from the minute he got there, he basically proved that he was one of them and that he would go. If you look at Obamacare, Obamacare is an example of going as far as the insurance companies will allow you to go. And everything that you just said is true. Biden, since he has been president, has been the modern Democrat, which means that while the Republicans don't even pretend they're doing anything but serve the corporate overlords, the Democrats acknowledge the pain that causes and do what they can to ameliorate the pain on the periphery, but still refuse to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. People get it now. Mommy and daddy are both crazy. Neither one of them is going to really help the working class in America. And that has put us in a place of deep upset, and that must lead to deep inquiry. What it must not lead to is a downward spiral emotionally of cynicism, which is just an excuse for not helping, and nihilism, and dysfunctional outrage. There is such thing as moral outrage. And this is a morally outrageous moment. But moral outrage is not born of anger. It's born of love. The anger that is dysfunctional and just spewing out and people spinning out right now is self-indulgent. We must practice a lot of emotional discipline right now. And the question needs to be not just endless bitching and moaning. Once you get the situation, now our question has to be, what are we going to do about it? And we need to do it quickly.
Hmm. And I'd like to ask you, there's kind of the left has really fractured, there's now this mindset to hell with electoral politics. We've knocked on doors, we've volunteered, we rode the Bernie wave twice. Maybe some people supported you in 2020, and it's all corrupt. It's all for naught. You referenced nihilism, so let's call it that. So people are saying we're going to do more direct action, whatnot. I personally think it doesn't need to be either or. You don't want to abandon, there have been elected leaders that have fostered change in our lifetime, not recently, but there has been. I wanted to ask you, what do you say to people who have really jumped onto that? And I understand their frustration, but what do you say to people who are just done with electoral politics? They want to go more the outside electoral politics,
You know what I say?
boycott.
You know what I say? Put down your violin. Only a really entitled, privileged generation says, we tried for 5 years and it didn't work. We tried for 10 years and it didn't work. Excuse me, how long do you think the abolitionists tried? What do you think they went through? What do you think the women's suffragettes went through? What do you think the civil rights movement went through? People say, I'm traumatized by the whole thing. Do you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma were not traumatized? Do you think the women who were women suffragettes were thrown in prison, and because the prison conditions were so terrible, they went on a hunger strike, and the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions on their necks to force feed them? You think they weren't anxious and traumatized? Enough with this preciousness. We've tried. We're not even trying it. I mean, look at other countries and what pro-democracy people risk. Can we be real here? We've got to stop coddling this in ourselves. Yes, this takes struggle. This takes maturity. Okay. You don't just think, no, I didn't get what I wanted. No, excuse me. Just like I said, let's put down the violin now. And I know it's disappointing, but we've got a democracy to save here. This is not just about you, is how I feel. This is about your standing in honor of your ancestors, saving democracy, because no matter what you think about this country, this world will not be better off if this country goes down. This is about our planet. This is about saving democracy. This is about course correcting America. And this is about serving our descendants and generations after us. This is not a time to indulge your disappointment. This is about bigger than you. This is how I feel towards that person. Now, the anti-electoralism thing serves the opponent. People say influence the conversation. The conversation's been influenced. Direct action, and I agree with you, Jordan, it's both and. It's inside and outside. But no matter what we do outside, if you don't start changing the people who are making these policies, it's these policies that are so destructive. We must change who's making them. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, it's inside, outside. And I think the anti-electoralism conversation is both dangerous and perilous. No, and naive.
And can I ask you also, because obviously this last year, there's been a lot of criticism of elected progressives. You just said we need to change the people making the policies. Well, the thought is people got a lot of these squad members elected. Of course, Bernie, people supported him, and they share our values and policies, but they're not going to the mat like people want them to go. I don't want to relitigate force the vote, but my point is, they seem to be more of the idea of forging relationships with more establishment Democrats, the long game, trying to get on committees, et cetera, et cetera. And I heard you in the past say, we don't have that long. So I wanted to ask you, I'm not trying to get you in trouble here, but I mean, you just look at some of these highly influential AOC, others, massive followings. It doesn't seem they're rallying the troops to go on offense against a Democratic Party that's essentially offering the same old, same old.
A lot of the people that you're talking about that we like so much had never been around wealth and power before. And so they didn't know how seductive it can be. I don't think the average person can possibly imagine how seductive it is for Nancy Pelosi to say, here's my private cell number. You can call me anytime. It's so clear to me what happened here. They were told, play the game, do it right, and you'll get what you need and want, and etc. And I'm sure many of them are very disappointed right now. Now, as far as Bernie is concerned, he must be heartbroken. Yeah, they trusted people in situations that perhaps in retrospect they should not have trusted. You know, there's a conversation about how back when Bernie was first a senator, many senators weren't that nice to him, sort of peripheralized him, and Joe Biden was nice to him. He was his friend. You know, all of us can imagine that. You have personal relationships. Now, in my life, I've been around quite a bit, and I think of myself as socioeconomically well-traveled. So I see certain things and I go, yeah, they should have known, but maybe how can I say they should have known? They hadn't been offered the private cell number of somebody that powerful before, so didn't know what a trap it is.
Right.
But we'll see. Everybody's on their journey. But the point is, one thing right now is what we need to get is about the system, not the people. And the system is such that both parties are clearly so infused with corporate dominance as to form a corporate-backed status quo that has hijacked both major political parties. And the status quo will not disrupt itself. Now, AOC has to decide for herself, what will I do now, as will many others. I love the way Cori Bush is really out there every day. She's so clearly trying. And they're all trying it in their way. You know, this is not about personal insult or criticism or blame. Look at what Bernie has done for us. Tremendous what he's done for us. It's a tragedy in my mind he's not president right now. On the other hand, I think a lot of us think, oh, couldn't you have fought a little harder here? Couldn't you have not agreed right there? We all get that. But it's like this is how I see it. It's like a tennis game. So let's say you're playing, when you see like a really brilliant tennis player, right? Like at Wimbledon or something, and you see a really brilliant player drop a ball in a way that's a mistake they haven't made since they were 12 years old. They don't have even a fraction of a second to indulge. Oh, shit. You just got to keep playing. We're going to win some, we're going to lose some. Win some, we're going to lose some. You can't allow yourself to get too sidetracked at all. We have to be thinking, what are we going to do now? That's what we need to be thinking. And as I was saying yesterday in a conversation with Crystal Ball, none of this would have happened had the American people not taken our eye off the political ball, as it were, for the last 40 years. Now, some people are listening and going, well, I wasn't even born 40 years ago, but some people are. None of us have played it perfectly, and all of us just need to do our best going forward. And if we're deeply reflective and in touch with what's happening and hip to what's going on in our lives and how we can help, I have a website called candidatesummit.com. And if people can go there, we'll go there. They will see all these really great people, non-corporate backed candidates who are running for Congress. This is a year for that. Look at the videos of these people. See what progressive is running in your district. If no progressive, I was talking to a woman the other day. She's in Northern California. I said, who's your congressperson? She told me who it was. I checked into him. I called her back. I said, you realize this guy is like totally corrupt. He's a corporatist Democrat who does nothing. She said, yeah, I know. I said, well, what progressive is running against him? She said, well, apparently no one. I said, why not you? I mean, everybody's got to think outside the box in terms of their own life right now. Either support a progressive candidate in 2022 or be a progressive candidate for something. It might be for school board. It might be for city council. This is the last thing we need to do is be anti-electoralism right now. Nothing would make the oppositional forces happier.
And what would be
I mean oppositional to us.
What would be your rebuttal to people who say, I get that, but we just talked about elected progressives who are not fighting to the mat for these policies. So you're telling me run or support people in my area, but aren't they just going to get in? They'll get Pelosi's number and...
Yeah. So you think that some of the progressive candidates right now don't see that? You think I would say to that person, what, you think they're stupider than you? You think you get that and they don't? You listen to some of these progressive candidates talking and they are aware of what just happened. They're aware they would have played force the vote differently. Go to the town hall and ask them. And listen, I don't know, Jordan, but I would assume that some of the people who didn't do force the vote might be looking back at it now thinking we should have played it that way. I don't know.
Right. Last question. I think it's important to end on hope because I'm a journalist, but I'm also a human. So all I do is travel and cover injustice, misery, corruption, communities poisoned. But I was hopeful at points last year because I got to cover for the first time in years. I mean, strikes, union drives, solidarity, workers on picket lines, almost like a kind of like a sleeping giant was awoken in many ways. I remember one man, a John Deere striker, said to me on the picket lines, the corporate media for years made us think we should just be happy to have anything.
Corporate media had us believing that we're just lucky to have a job. We're lucky. If you're still at a place that still offers insurance and you're not paying, you're lucky.
And I thought that was really powerful. But I wanted to ask you, you're looking, because there's more strikes popping up, union drives, Starbucks was just successful, and now other Starbucks are popping up to form for a union, Amazon workers fighting. What does this say to you? Obviously, we talked about the electoral part, but this workers fighting back and in many cases winning, what does that say about hope and what is possible in the coming year?
It's saying exactly what you're saying. The giants waking up. The giants waking up. Nabisco, Kellogg's, Amazon, Starbucks. People are seeing what's happening in places like Kroger. People are seeing that Kroger employees are, how many of them are literally hungry while the company is raking in billions. There's an awakening going on here. People are recognizing it. We are living simultaneously during a time that the archetype of the fall of Rome and the archetype of a new world that is struggling to be born. Both are happening at the same time. And with every thought we think and every action that we take, we are feeding one or the other. There's no such thing as a neutral thought. There's no such thing as a neutral life right now. When I was young, they used to say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. The point is how many people are striking. The point is how many people like yourself are covering these strikes. The point is how many people are awakening to this, the reemergence of the labor movement. I'm old enough to remember how during the 80s, the far right forces they were just set out to decimate the labor movement, and in many ways was successful. So to see it regrowing, this is like a beautiful thing. You listen to people like Max Alvarez, you listen to people like Jonah Furman. Yeah, you listen to you watch what you're showing. People are waking up. When you look at how social change happens, the people who are the most inwardly damaged by all this think that social change only happens on a horizontal basis. Social change happens on a vertical basis. It is as much about an awakening among people. It's that 100th monkey theory. It's about what happens in any system that flips it over. And it's never a majority. The majority didn't wake up and say, let's free the slaves. The majority didn't wake up and say, let's give women the right to vote. The majority didn't say, let's dismantle segregation. It's when enough people, and there's a lot of conversation about what that is. Social systems thinkers say it's about 11%. But you can feel it building. And I think where we get in trouble is we go, but how is it going to happen? It's less about knowing yet how it's going to happen and more about being committed that it will happen, because we will not tolerate the destruction and the dismantling of American democracy on our watch. And when enough of us just get to that place and we're fierce about it, the answers in terms of material problem solving and strategy will begin to emerge in ways that we can't even yet imagine.
And real quick, I know you previously said, things are in flux. There's no decisions to be made on 2024. But whether it's you or not, do you think it's important right now for progressives, or do you think it's important that progressives do challenge, whether it's Biden, Vice President Harris, if they continue on with the status quo? Do you think it's important for progressives to pose a challenge, win, lose, or draw, just to fight this continuation of the same old, the Democratic Party?
Not only is it important, we have to do it from a place that's not win, lose, or draw. We need to do it from a place of, and we're going to win this time.
Well said. Well said. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And you have a podcast, so the Marianne Williamson Show YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.